Hey there, today's review will be a 2013 Adult Swim series, and that is Rick and Morty. Now, I'll tell you, this show was a success of the modern days of Adult Swim. Rick and Morty is originally and currently airing on Adult Swim, an adult programming block on Cartoon Network. Originally aired on Teletoon at night, a programming block on Teletoon. Currently airing on Fox in the UK and Ireland. Comedy Central, Comedy Extra, Channel 4, E4 Extra, originally aired on E4 in the UK and Ireland, and currently streaming on Max, formerly known as HBO Max, Netflix, Hulu and its beta on Disney+. The show revolves around the adventures of the members of the Smith household, which consists of parents Jerry and Beth, their children Summer and Morty, and Beth's father, Rick Sanchez, who lives with them as a guest. The family lives outside of Seattle, Washington. The adventures of Rick and Morty, however, take place across an infinite number of realities, with the characters traveling to other planets and dimensions through portals and Rick's flying saucer. Rick is an eccentric and alcoholic mad scientist, who eschews many ordinary conventions such as school, marriage, love, and family. He frequently goes on adventures with his 14-year-old grandson, Morty, a kind-hearted but easily distressed boy, whose Macron V but grounded moral compass plays counterpoint to Rick's Machiavellian ego. Morty's 17-year-old sister, Summer, is a more conventional teenager who worries about improving her status among her peers and sometimes follows Rick and Morty on their adventures. The kid's mother, Beth, is a generally level-headed person and assertive force in the household. Though self-conscious about her professional role as a horse surgeon, she is dissatisfied with her marriage to Jerry, a simple-minded and insecure person, who disapproves of Rick's influence over his family. Different versions of the characters inhabit other dimensions throughout the show's multiverse and their personal characteristics can vary from one reality to another. The show's original Rick identifies himself as Rick Sanchez of Earth Dimension C-137, in reference to his original universe, but this does not apply to any other member of the Smith household. The writing for this show is mostly pretty solid, as while it can be pretty crude, wacky, and vulgar, it also manages to be pretty clever with the humor, action, suspense, and even heart. It's also one of the first mainstream projects to introduce the concept of the multiverse and the various possibilities that can be done with it, and the consequences it can bring. It also makes room for some tender and heartfelt moments too. However, it doesn't always work, as it can be pretty bumpy at times, especially with the more recent seasons. Arguably, sometimes all the scientific and multiverse stuff can go over people's heads and get complicated and confusing. There are a few weak plot points, and sometimes it can get too vulgar and gross. There are some pretty solid episodes like Pilot, Anatomy Park, Rick Potion Number 9, Ricksty Minutes, Total Recall, Get Swifty, the interdimensional cable episodes, Look Who's Purging Now, The Wedding Squanchers, The Rickshank Redemption, Rick Mincing the Stone, Morty's Mind Blowers, The ABCs of Beth, One Crew Over the Cuckoo's Morty, Claw and Hoarder, Vat of Acid, Star Mort, Rick Turn of the Jerry, A Rick Convenient Mort, Gotron Genesis Rick Vangelion, Rick Ternal Friendshine of the Spotless Mort, Rick Morai Jack, Solarix, and Rick, a Mort Well-Lived. There are also some pretty bad episodes like Rick Dependence Spraying and Final Dismissation. The show does have a pretty solid sense of humor for the most part, as while it can be very crude and vulgar, it does manage to make it work most of the time, like the witty banter and dialogue between the characters, the gags and slapstick, the more humorous situations the characters get into, and some of the gross-out and adult humor. But it doesn't always work, as sometimes it can be too gross and cringy, like the incest jokes. The action scenes, despite getting super bloody and gory, are a lot of fun and do provide the show with a sense of excitement and adventure, such as Rick and or Morty, and some their family and allies escaping from dangerous and tight situations, fighting off a group of deadly enemies, creatures or one of the major villains, or just trying to survive. Despite all the crude humor and grisly action, there are some occasional tender and thought-provoking moments every now and then, like Morty learning how to live in a new universe after leaving his old one behind, and Rick dealing with his tragic past. The animation is pretty well done and does have a simple but also solid look to it. The characters and various aliens and creatures all have pretty solid designs and fluid movements. The backgrounds are pretty well done, and there are some pretty solid effects. While many Adult Swim shows do look very cheap, they can range from either looking cheap but also good, to cheap and unappealing. This thankfully does look good. The characters may be intentionally deplorable, but they still manage to be likable and funny, and do have some solid chemistry and development. Rick and Morty themselves are solid protagonists as they do have some solid chemistry despite all of their differences. Rick is very cynical, nihilistic, and crude to practically everyone around him, even other versions of himself, but he does have a soft spot for at least a few people, and he is incredibly smart, even though his inventions do often result in trouble. While Morty is more timid and meek due to all the insane things that happen to him on practically a daily basis, but he is brave enough to join Rick on his adventures despite his reluctance, and he does learn to grow more of a backbone and stand up to Rick as the show progresses. The rest of the characters are mostly all decent aside from a few duds, as there are some pretty solid ones like Summer, as while she can be pretty sassy and dismissive, she tends to be more of a willing and stern companion to Rick than Morty. Beth, who's a level-headed person and tries her best to be a good mother to her kids despite having her own inner demons to deal with. Space Beth, who's a more adventurous and kick-ass version of the more mundane Beth and acts as the cool mom. Bird Person, who's Rick's best friend who goes through some pretty troubling events. President Curtis, who's not only the President of the United States, but is also a cunning strategist and competent fighter. And a few of the more minor and one-off characters like Squanchy, Planet Ina, Unity, and the Vindicators. But there are also some lame characters like Jerry, who's meant to be the straightforward everyman who gets caught up in all the chaos, but he tends to be more annoying and uninteresting if anything. Also, Jessica is just the generic love interest. The villains that Rick, Morty, and their allies encounter may mostly come off as more goofy and incompetent, like Prince Nebulon, Lucius Needful, the foot soldiers of the Galactic Federation, and Mr. Nimbus. There are some that are more cunning and threatening like Tammy, Phoenix Person, Bird Person's twisted self, Evil Morty, and Rick Prime. The voice acting is pretty solid, and many of the voice actors deliver some solid performances like Justin Roiland as Rick and Morty, Sarah Chalk as Beth and Space Beth, Spencer Grammer as Summer, Chris Parnell as Jerry, Dan Harmon as Bird Person, Keith David as President Curtis, Cassie Steele as Tammy, and many of the guest stars like Dana Carvey, John Oliver, David Cross, Alfred Molina, Morris LaMarche, Key Peele, Jermaine Clement, Christina Hendricks, Patton Oswalt, Kurtwood Smith, Stephen Colbert, Alan Tudyk, Alex Hirsch, Nathan Fillion, Tony Hale, Susan Sarandon, Danny Trejo, Christian Slater, Peter Serafinowicz, Sam Neill, Kathleen Turner, Taika Waititi, Jeffrey Wright, Pamela Adlon, Matthew Broderick, Paul Giamatti, Alison Brie, Steve Buscemi, Christina Ricci, Timothy Olyphant, Peter Dinklage, Diedrich Butter, Will Forte, Jack Black, Daniel Radcliffe, and more. The music is pretty decent for what it is, and it does manage to fit within the wacky, sci-fi tone of the show. Overall, while it does definitely have its problems, this is still a highly imaginative and creative series that is worth admiring it for. But as for recommending to watch it, it really would depend on where you currently stand with the series. I'm still looking forward to more new adventures as long as there's a solid ending planned, and I am curious to see where it goes from here since Roiland was booted from it for pretty grim reasons. Oh, and let's not forget that this show also has its own Japanese anime series on Toonami. Rick and Morty, the anime, which was a great Japanese anime, same as Powerpuff Girls Z. And so, what is my verdict on this Adult Swim? I'm giving it a 9 out of 10. This show is a success to the modern days of Adult Swim, although Cartoon Network was trashed with Teen Titans Go. But this show is a success of modern Adult Swim.
Did you get any of that? It's a good show!